Sir, the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Mr. Pritam Singh, has mentioned CMIO quite a number of times in his speech. In the light of this, can I ask our MCCY Minister, Mr. Edwin Tong, to share with us the relevance of CMIO?
The Workers' Party has on several occasions questioned the relevance or the continued relevance of having the CMIO classification and has also called for it to be removed. In reality, both sides of the House, and I think certainly on these examples, the Workers' Party as well, realize that it is important to look at these outcomes by segments of society. And it is only if you have the CMIO classification and breakdown that you will be able to track performance of relative segments of society, to gauge the outcomes, and to gauge ourselves the efficacy and outcomes of these programs that we have in place. So for example, the relevant ministries will give more full answer, I'm sure, in due course. But if you take some of the points raised in these PQs, we are able to say that the percentage of Malay P1 cohort going on to post-secondary education has doubled in the last 25 years. The number of Malay university graduates have doubled from 5.5% in 2010 to 10.8% in 2020. If you take the average Malay student, they were found on the PISA assessment in 2018 to have scored higher, above the OECD average of a typical Malay student in Singapore. And Malay students also outperform international students in the same PISA assessment on 21st century competencies. This gives us, Mr. Speaker, a good gauge of not just the relative performance of the segments in our society, but also on the efficacy of our programs, and allows us to look at relative outcomes, to assess where there might be gaps, and to help in targeted, specialized, curated ways. And so, sir, with reference to the point made by the member, Mr. Sitoh, I think these are important classifications that feed into an important outcome in terms of the programs that we make. And I would invite the Workers' Party to consider this position and perhaps to state whether or not they see the CMIO as a relevant consideration today. And I would suggest, Mr. Speaker, that certainly from the nature, type, and range of questions that they have asked in Parliament, I think that would appear to be so.
I think we have to accept that we operate on terms dictated by the government which wins the mandate at the elections, and that has been the PAP government, and it has continued this CMIO model. I think where we're coming from is and I believe the government is on the same page in this regard, that we want to level everybody up so that no race feels that that government policy doesn't reach out to them in a way which brings us to that destination which the Workers' Party wants Singapore to reach, of a race-neutral society. So these questions inevitably will be asked, but I think the point I want to share with Minister Edwin Tong is, to what end do we keep asking these questions? What is the end game? And I think we want a situation where we can tell that government policy is improving outcomes, especially for communities which are not doing well. But let's be clear about where we want to go with this. More than that, I think immigration after 1990 has changed the complexion of Singapore society. That are we just looking at CMIO now, or is there something a little bit more complicated in Singapore that we need to look into?
To look at the outcomes and to see whether or not we can improve certain segments in society in Singapore, and to look at whether the programs help to uplift them. Would he not accept that if you are looking at how to uplift certain segments by race, which we have done, then would that not mean that the CMIO classification would not only be relevant, it would in fact be necessary to retain this distinction, at least for now, until we reach post-racial, race-blind or race-neutral society?
To that extent, yes. I think you have to look at how the government is performing on these indicators, and eventually, with more opposition MPs in the House looking at these numbers and figures and asking more pointed questions and even alternatives, putting up alternatives for debate and discussion, hopefully we can reach that end state, which will be beneficial for all Singaporeans, not just this generation, but those that come after us.
I would like to ask the Leader of the Opposition, whether he thinks that we should allow ethnic enclaves to form and just to see what happens by abolishing the EIP today and then reach a situation where we were 50 years ago, 60 years ago, at the point of independence, and then try and correct it when all the problems arise, or whether we should take what he calls a preemptive, but the measures that we are taking today to avoid such a situation arising. And also, are we more likely to level everyone up if we are able to identify the issues that each of the communities in Singapore may face and therefore have more targeted programs for them, or to ignore the differences which the leader of the opposition says we should be race blind or race neutral and just treat everybody as though they are exactly the same. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I would like to ask the leader of the opposition whether he agrees with me, because he mentioned more members of opposition in the House would lead to better outcome. I would like to ask the leader of the opposition whether he agrees with me that these are matters of great sensitivity and have to be handled with great sensitivity rather than be exploited for political purposes.
Is Senior Minister suggesting that the WP are using these episodes for political purposes? The answer, I think, should be obvious. The answer is no. We don't do that. And I think I appreciate the accolade because I think it is appropriate. In terms of the series of hypotheticals that the Minister put out, I think moving from one extreme to another extreme is probably not the best policy approach. Hence the earlier exchange we had about evolving the EIP to suit the needs of this current generation. But I hope it doesn't undermine or take away the point that philosophically, where does the WP want Singapore to go? And I don't think the PAP is very far away from this, that we all are trying to move towards a race-neutral society. And we may have different approaches of going at it. We, of course, have the harder job of trying to second-guess what is reasonable in the way we move there because we don't have the information and the broad sweep of facts that the government has. But I think by and large, we accept that we have to move forward in a way where Singapore as a country, as a society, is strengthened.
The philosophy we can agree on. We all want a multiracial Singapore. We want Singaporeans to live together in multiracial communities, not in segregated communities. I think even the WP agrees on that. The leader of the opposition says so too. But how do we get there? Those are methods. Methods can be adapted and changed. But we have this same philosophy that we want a multiracial Singapore, integrated housing, well-integrated communities and schools. And we're more likely to get there with the HDB policies that we have today with EIP, rather than what the Workers' Party is proposing. In fact, their manifesto says abolish it now, although the leader of the opposition seems to have shifted away from that because he realizes that that's untenable. Are we more likely to achieve an integrated Singapore by having integrated housing, or to abolish the EIP as the Workers' Party would propose today and have segregated housing? And then how do we learn how to live together again? That's the question I have, sir. And I'm glad to hear the leader of the opposition says that we should all not exploit the issues of race and religion for political purposes. I applaud that.